All right, everybody, who's the happiest little cycling coach that there is in the world right now? That's this guy. Great weekend, a banner weekend for me. I had 5 athletes racing this weekend, and every single one of them podiumed, including not only taking first overall in the Calvin's Challenge 24-hour solo non-drafting event, but he also set a new course record, and that's what we're going to break down today. All things ultra, all things pacing. Particularly, he paced it in a way that I believe it's experimental, but I believe gave him his best time, which would be negative splits. So let's jump in and talk all things fueling, Calvin's Challenge, negative splits, pacing, how to set up your Garmin head unit, all these kinds of things to have your best ultra as your next ultra. All right, so this is Calvin's Challenge. We have the big loop and then the small loop. And so the big loop, obviously, that's this guy right here. And you could do this throughout the day. Or they gave you an option this year to do one big loop and then just sit here in this small loop and just spin around and around and around. My athlete, he went out. Boom, did all this and then just went around. He did this once and then he went around and did all kinds of great stuff. Now, before we get into his data, I want to look at 2 other athletes who have done this challenge in the past and look at their data. That way we can really understand this athlete's data and how he paced it, because there's a lot of different strategies when it comes to pacing in the ultra world for a 24-hour event. So let's dig in and see what they've all done. So this is an athlete that did it last year, and this was the first time that he ever ridden Calvin's Challenge, and he did his first 4 hours in zone 3. So if you understand these concepts, zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, each zone is attached with a certain hour limit that, or if you're doing VO2, minute limit, but it's associated with a certain time limit of how long you can do that zone. So, zone 1, 24 hours. Zone 2, some very rare individuals can do zone 2 effort, all day. This is if you have your zone set correctly. But zone 3 is really set for 3 to 5 hours. And when you pace a zone 3 effort and, you give it your all, then boom, then that's, you're pretty much done at hour 5. And so say, for instance, if your lower limit of zone 3 is 230 watts, your upper limit of zone 3 is 260 watts, you can do, this is all theory. We have to test it in practice. But in general, you could do the 260 watts for 3 hours. You can do the 230 watts for 5 hours. And that's kind of how it goes. This particular athlete chose to do those first 5 hours in zone 3. And we can see what happens, right? So he collapses. This is his power trend line. And so he collapses, but the bad part is that when you go out too hard, you're going to find yourself stopping a lot more. And this particular athlete got 311 miles and made it only about 21 hours. So he did not make it the full 24 hours for the ride. He made it to about hour 21. And so the whole idea with ultra is not going out too hard. But the problem is that for the ultra world, not going out too hard means that you're really going easy and that you show up to the race, you feel great. But the great thing about, tracking watts and testing and understanding where your zones are, getting great event data from other events, is that we can really, suggest a great starting wattage that's not going to be too hard or not too easy. So let's look at, so that athlete died 1,000 deaths to get across the finish line. And I must add, so when we look at that data, he did those first 4 or 5 hours in zone 3. It's pretty amazing that he did go as long as he did for that day, because that's a very hard row to hoe. One of my favorite types of workouts is, that 50, 60 mile zone 3 effort where it's just kind of all out, but you start at zone 3 and end at zone 3. And if you do it right, by the time you get to that, 50, 60, 65 mile mark, you want to get off the bike. You have just given it your all, right? And so that this athlete stayed on the bike and that he kept going for the rest of the event is pretty amazing. All right, so now here we got actual race data from this particular event. This gentleman got in 405 miles. If we look at his first 4 hours, he got in 174 watts. And if we look at his last 4 hours, he got in 152 watts. And so I would argue that, this is event data. I have no idea how this athlete prepared for this or how he set his zones or any strategy whatsoever. But just looking at this data, that he started out too hard and he kind of died 1,000 deaths to get across that finish line, right? So your power is dropping, you're getting fatigued. The problem is when you go out too hard, any kind of effort out there on the bike in an ultra event, you're starting fatigue at minute 0. You're developing those byproducts of fatigue. Now, you can go out too hard, die 1,000 deaths, right? But if you go out too hard, you're generating more byproducts associated with fatigue. So you have a choice to make as ultra athletes. Where do you want to develop those fatigue byproducts? At the very beginning and carry them with you for 23 to 24 hours, or carry them with you, develop them at the end and carry them at the end. And so this particular athlete, when we look at his data, we see it's not too bad. This was pretty good. I mean, this is 405 miles. But and I don't want to disparage this effort at all. This is an amazing effort. He did a great job. He stayed on the bike. Slow miles are better than no miles. He rocked it out. But my suggestion would be for that particular athlete would be to drop his starting watts and go a little slower, easier at the end. That way you don't have to spend as much time off the bike later in the evening or later in the afternoon or things like that. And you will have more to drop, more watt bombs to drop at the end. Okay. So, before we jump into my athletes' data, this is the kind of screen that I recommend all my athletes to train on at least, and pretty much all events. You really can do this. Run this screen. You have your lap time, and to pace these efforts, it's all about your 3-second power and your average lap power. So if you start, you want to say your starting watts is going to be at 160, right? You watch that 3-second power, watch that 160, and then you can really fine tune and dial in your watts. It's all about energy conservation. When you go out too hard for a tempo effort, right, you are immediately burning glycogen. So when you get to zone 3, you go from primarily a fat burning athlete in a zone 2 state or a zone 1 state. And when you get to zone 3, you go primarily to burning carbs. You're immediately pulling all that glycogen from the musculature, from the liver, from your blood. And so you are really depleting yourself pretty quick when you go out too hard. The goal for these ultra things, it's all about understanding your energy systems, what you can do, how long you can do it, and it's energy management. And so when you go by watts and you have your zones dialed in, you're testing, everything, all that great stuff, it's energy management. We want you burning fats and as little as carbs as possible. So, for instance, if you go out, upper zone 1 is where I like to start newer athletes, right? Let's set our starting watts at upper zone 1. You're primarily, this is arbitrary, but let's just say like you're 65, 70, 75% burning fats and the rest burning carbs. When you go zone 3, you're now 60%, 70, 80% burning carbs and, only like 10% burning fats. And so we want to make sure that we are sparing that glycogen for these ultra events as much as possible. And looking at a screen like this can help you do that very thing. It's all about energy management. So now here's where we look at his watts. So you can see at the beginning, he's in the first 4 hours, he's 163. And at the end, he's 169 watts. So basically we see his power trend line go up throughout the event. His speed goes up throughout the event. His cadence is straight on, pretty much just dead center. He chose a cadence of 65. He just brilliantly rocked that out, and his cadence was pretty much on. And so for me as a coach, this is about the most perfect data that I could absolutely imagine. He was only 15 minutes off the bike. That's, grabbing a water bottle here, peeing here, stuff like that. But this is the most amazing data that I've ever seen from an ultra athlete, in that it is that concept of negative splits, in that you start slower, easy, and then get harder, slowly faster throughout time, and so that your last 4 to 5 hours are stronger than your first 4 to 5 hours, right? That way we save the building of the major fatigue byproducts towards the end of the event rather than the beginning of the event. And then when you get to the end of the event, guess what? You could just fall off your bike with all those fatigue products in your legs, no problem. But if you develop that fatigue, if you develop those byproducts at the beginning of the race, man, you just die 1,000 deaths to get across that finish line. Now, the negative splits, not too many people in the ultra world do this that I know of. I look at a lot of data. So for instance, I just looked at Matthew Left Hand's data, which he makes publicly available. So he had a great 24-hour world attempt in which he did 650 indoor miles on the trainer in a 24-hour event. And his watts were just straight across, beautiful, perfect. That's a great way to do it. I like negative splits for those athletes that can do it, where you're starting a little bit lower and you might feel uncomfortable with how slowly you're doing. You're going to be telling yourself, I'm not going hard enough. I'm not going hard enough. But start a little bit slower, easy, go harder, faster through time. And the concept of negative splits is, it's kind of the fastest way to run. It's people use it to do it in track. This is the concept of negative splits has been around in the endurance world forever. It's really popular in track. Every time I give an FTP test, that 20-minute effort, I want to see negative splits. And so, so say if your goal wattage for that FTP test is like 320 or something like that, well, you start at maybe 310 and slowly tick your watts up, and then you pass 320, and then, your last 3 minutes are just an all-out slugfest, rather than starting hard as you can go at the beginning and dying 1,000 deaths. I like the other way, where you can go, and I have countless FTP tests with athletes to prove that that is the best way to do that. And so this was basically a giant FTP test, a giant TT. When races happen for my TT specialists, people are just, doing like 40K TTs. I did an event this weekend where it was just a 7-mile straight up climb. I started the event at 260 watts for those first 10 minutes. And then I look at my last 5 minutes of data. It was at 285 watts. So I nailed my negative splits to get up that mountain, and I got my best time. So I really believe in all that. Now, fueling. He did amazing with fueling. He had 23 bottles, 90 grams of carbs in every bottle, and he nailed all 23 bottles. And so he rocked out his fueling. And so he used on that event, and I use Formula 369. So I get a big 10-pound bag of it, and I get this glass container, and I throw it all in there. And the Formula 369 is great because it's far cheaper, but it does have that fructose, which enables you to go to that 90 grams of carbs per hour. So if your mixture only has like multidextrin or glucose, something like that, you can only really absorb about 60 grams of carbs per hour, and then it just starts backing up after that. Think rock gut. But when you get that fructose, and he uses it in training, he uses it for every single ride, so he's used to it. We've built him up over time to that 90 grams of carbs per hour. What happens is that it has a ratio of 1-to-1 maltodextrin to fructose. And so it's a great mixture. It's a great price point, which you can use it in all of your training and your events, which is what you want. There's a lot of products out there like Maurten and Scratch. Their fructose mixtures are super expensive. And so, I've got athletes that only just want to use that mix on event day. Well, that is no bueno whatsoever. You want to get used to that mix. You want your body to get used to that mix. You want to understand how that mix works in training. And so that's why I love the Formula 369. For those of you who have not used Formula 369, I have a coupon code that they gave me. And so I'll just drop a coupon code down in the notes for you guys all to look at. So we had 3 great events, or 3 great data points that we look in terms of pacing and ultra, kind of that flat pacing, kind of going out too hard, which is the most common, and then negative splits where you start easier and end stronger. So negative splits, baby. If you can do it, coaches out there, if you can get your athletes to try it, give it a try and see how you do. Leave comments below, like and subscribe.